Theory students. This video, I'm going to talk about just Mill and sort of go an overview of John Stuart Mill here. You were supposed to read Rawls also for this week, and for Rawls, I would encourage you to go back and look at the previous video that I made that you can find here on this YouTube page or Classroom on UMGC. For John Stuart Mill, it's important to understand his basic starting point, and his basic starting point is the principle of utilitarianism. So it's impossible to understand Mill's political arguments here without understanding his ethical framework, right? His ethical outlook, his ethical worldview. And so Mill is what's known as a utilitarianism, right? So there's all these sorts of major ethical theories that exist out there. There's virtue theory with Aristotle, which is that everyone has a purpose or a telos, and that your actions can be determined to be just or unjust, good or bad, in relation to whether or not you are fulfilling your purpose in life, right? And Aristotle details what that telos, what that purpose looks like. There's deontological ethics, which is Immanuel Kant, where you are supposed to follow your duty, right? We have a method to determine rationally what our duties and obligations are, and justice is fulfilling those duties for the sake of those duties. Then we have nihilism, right? Nihilism where nothing matters and you're just going to die, so just do whatever the hell you want. But in contrast to those, we have utilitarianism. And Mill is a utilitarianism, and utilitarianism is a consequentialist approach to ethics and morality, where we don't judge the intent of your actions, we judge the outcome of your actions. And if actions produce or tend to produce more joy and happiness in society, then those actions can be considered ethical or just. And if they don't, right, if they produce more harm or sadness or despair in society, that make society worse off, then we can judge those actions to be wrong and unethical. And so, in both On Liberty and in Subjection of Women, Mill wants to argue for robust individual rights and freedoms. And the underlying assumption here from Mill is that increasing rights and freedoms, giving more people more individual autonomy, more individual ability to act in the ways that they believe is best for themselves, will produce the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Mill writes these because, one, he is deeply concerned about the state of rights in the world at the time, but also because utilitarianism, or opponents of utilitarianism, have argued that utilitarianism is detrimental to rights. That if all that matters is the outcome of someone's actions, if we wanted to suppress free speech, that could, in theory, make a lot of people happy, right? If we stop the speech that's really unpleasant, that would make a lot of people happy. And so opponents of utilitarianism say utilitarianism is bad because it denies people rights, because if denying people rights is what makes people happy, then that's what we ought to do. Mill fundamentally objects to that. Mill argues that the principle of utility, or utilitarianism, is a justification for protecting rights, right? That protecting individual rights and expanding rights and freedoms is the best way to increase the overall sum of happiness in society in the long run, right? So that's Mill's starting point. That's where he is going from here, right? And for Mill, when we look at, say, like the subjection of women, he argues that it's really objectionable to just sort of make these assumptions about men and women. That just saying that women can't do things out of social expediency, right? That there are natural differences between men and women is detrimental to overall utility. The denial of the ability of women to work, the denial of the ability of women to be in charge of their own affairs, the denial of voting or enfranchisement or unrepresentation in parliament, or all these things that are restricting women are overall decreasing happiness in society. And that it's wrong to say that women have a different nature than men. And that women are naturally suited for one thing and men are naturally suited in the other. And this is actually really closely related to his arguments in On Liberty, because in On Liberty he says tradition is the problem, right? People who just do things out of tradition, they're mistaken. They're not free thinking, and so the condition of women is because people are not thinking, right? And what we need to do is we need to increase people's abilities to freely speak their minds, right? In On Liberty, right? On Liberty, he basically starts out by saying, he says, the object of this essay is to assert one very simple principle. That principle is that the sole end for which mankind are warranted, individually or collectively, is in interfering with the liberty of action of any other number is self-protection, right? So he goes on to say that it is proper to state that I forego any advantage which could fully be derived from my argument from the idea of abstract right as a thing independent of utility. Okay, so we exist, society exists, to protect ourselves, okay? And part of that self-protection is the expansion of liberty, okay? And that the expansion of liberty is founded in the principle of utility and utilitarian ideals and principles. The idea here is that there are all these traditions that exist in society and all these values that we have in society, and we just sort of accept them unthinkingly. And that sort of unthinking way leads to the oppression of peoples. And it leads to overall unhappiness. And so what we need to do is we need to unshackle ourselves from conformity, right? So there's all these people in this period of time, right? Nietzsche being sort of the other big guy that's trying to say, like, conformity is terrible, right? Because what we get is mass self-repression in society. It destroys human energy. It destroys creativity. What we need is self-development. That if we are to survive as a species, if we are to thrive as individuals, we need self-development. We need to be authentic individuals who are well-rounded, and that was what will allow us to be happy. And the only way to do that is the expansion of rights and freedoms. Free speech, freedom of thought. Okay? It's important that we people be free to develop our own ways of living. Right? We need experiments of living, Mill says in On Liberty. This also connects back to the subjection of women, right? We ought to allow women to have experiments in living, right? Because that is what will bring society the most happiness. When it comes to custom and conformity, it's one of the most dangerous things to liberty, Mill says. And this is actually something, if you ever read Alexis de Tocqueville, who writes a book called Democracy in America, where Tocqueville is a Frenchman who comes to the United States and he writes this book about what Americans are like. Mill and Tocqueville are very much in line here, right? So a lot of thinkers in this time period are advocating against conformity, right? That the greatest danger to liberty is non-free thinking and conformity, right? And what we need is a robust marketplace of ideas, and that people ought to be encouraged to think freely for themselves and bring their thoughts and ideas into a marketplace of ideas, that we ought to have competing ideas constantly in conflict. And through that, we will determine what the truth is. One of the problems with custom and tradition, Mill says, is that it denies us the ability to really understand what's true. Okay? And same thing for women, right? If we're just going to assume, women are the fairer sex and, make all these sexist assumptions about women or misogynistic assumptions about women, we're not allowing the truth to emerge as to who women really are, right? We can't really understand what women are, Mill thinks, if we're just going to repress them, right? Because of custom and tradition. Same thing in, on liberty. So these arguments really mirror each other, right? Because the end goal is to produce a society that is happy. And the only way a society can be happy is if it progresses. And the only way a society can progress is if it's a society that pursues the truth. The only way to pursue truth is to have a robust marketplace of ideas, of freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of living, so people can come to their own conclusions as to the best course of action and right and wrong. If you allow other people to think for you, right, that's what conformity is and tradition. If you allow other people to think for you, you are not allowing for that to happen. You are suppressing your own potential flourishing. Okay? It's not just governments that coerce us and oppress us. It's other citizens that coerce us and oppress us, right? And so we need to be careful of both. Governments ought to give more room for freedom of expression. This is also something we see in Kant. So Kant and Mill are very simpatico. They're very much on board for different reasons, right? One's deontological, one's utilitarian. But they arrive at the same conclusion. Government ought to allow more room for freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of living, but also we ourselves need to be more tolerant of others and their thoughts and beliefs. Okay, we don't want avoidance of issues. We want to confront issues head on. Nothing should be off the table, right? We need to be able to be willing to engage with others. There's only one real line that Mill draws in terms of the expansion of rights and freedoms, and that's what he calls the harm principle. Your freedoms extend as far as they want until they begin to cause actual physical harm to someone else. So as long as you're not engaging in physical harm, Mill believes that your rights and freedoms are in some ways limitless. Okay? Right? Because we're not isolated beings. We live in society, we live in community, and so we ought to make sure that we do not injure the community. Again, that utilitarian principle, right? We need to produce more harm than good. We ought not to cause harm or injury. And so, we can harm people physically, which we ought not to do as individuals, but the state and society can also cause harm to us by repressing us and holding down our rights and freedoms and limiting our ability to act. Okay, so that's what Mill's concerned about here, in both On Liberty and the subjugation of rights, subjugation of women.